Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahawashi, Bahasham, Barakahak Barakathum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahawashi. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who ruled and teach well. In peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure to the end. This is the brother Ra'aya coming at you with another lesson, and I'll be profiling this video from World Affairs in Context's YouTube channel titled U.S.-Turkey Power Shift, Russian Oil, F-35 Fighter Jets, and Middle East Conflicts. And as we'll see in this video by Lena Petrova, the U.S. and Turkey just had a meeting where their president Erdogan, visited Trump over a whole host of issues. The gist is that the U.S. is trying to get closer ties with Turkey, really at the detriment of their relationship with Russia. Well, according to biblical prophecy, that is not going to happen. In fact, Turkey is going to completely ally themselves with Russia at some point, betraying the West, even though they are a member of NATO. Which, before we play this clip, let's go to Ezekiel chapter 38. I'm going to start at verse 1. And the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog. This is the biblical name for Russia, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws. And that's the Most High putting those Russian Edomites back in that confrontational Soviet Union spirit, which we can clearly see with the war going on in Ukraine, them just disregarding, pretty much anything Trump says and making nuclear threats to the West, damn near every other day. And I will bring thee forth and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, their military might gathered down into the so-called Middle East, really Western Asia, which is its true name, for the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon, the main and final, confrontation of World War III. Verse 5, Persia, which is the ancient name for Iran, which we know Russia and Iran have very close ties, Ethiopia and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. And when you look up these two countries' relationships with Russia or the BRICS, you can see that they're tight with each other. Here's the main point I wanted to get to. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the North Quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee. And Gomer is speaking of Turkey, because when we go to this image of a map from a book called The Israelites by B.J. Iserlin, it shows, Western Asia with its ancient names in the particular regions. And where you see I pointed the pencil, you see Gomer. And, if you look to the left, you'll see engraved the Mediterranean Sea. And then, of course, to the right, you see, what would be Iraq, further to the right, you see Elam, which would be Iran. But that landmass where Gomer is known as Turkey today. So again, Gomer or Turkey and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the North Quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee. Be thou prepared and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company, or your allies that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. So, Gomer is going to be company to Gog, and Gog is going to be company unto Gomer, and they're coming against the West, during World War III. And when we go to what the header reads, it says, prophesy about Gog and the future invasion of Israel. They're going to be coming against those Amalekite Edomites. or the 1948ers, the small hats, who are currently in the land of Israel. They're coming against them, which when we go to that back to that video with Lena Petrova, you'll see that those 1948ers are at friction with Turkey over the purchase of F-35s, and they're using their puppets in Congress to try to block it. Hey, this is just another, fracture point in that fragile relationship that Turkey and, NATO and the EU have with each other. But eventually, that crack is going to become a dam that's going to bust, and Turkey or Gomer is going to completely betray, the West and get with the East. But let's get back to this video. And this is a fair use copyright disclaimer. I do not own any of the footage in this clip, nor do I stand to gain from it monetarily. It is simply
Hello and
for
welcome back,
educational
everyone.
purposes.
Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, a special thank you to every single one of you who has become a subscriber on Substack, Patreon, here on YouTube, or who has otherwise supported my work. I want you to know that I appreciate every single one of you. Following the UN General Assembly meetings this week, Turkish President Erdogan visited the White House. For Erdogan, this meeting was his first visit to the White House in 6 years. And for Trump, it was an opportunity, a really great one, to press, quote, his friend into making strategic choices that could reshape regional geopolitics. Trump doubled down on his attempts to cut the world off of energy resources from Russia. He urged Erdogan to stop buying Russian oil, the same thing he did with China and India without success. Trump and Erdogan had a truly wide-ranging agenda. Topics included tariffs, nuclear cooperation, civilian nuclear cooperation, Turkey's long-standing desire to rejoin the F-35 fighter jet program, Patriot air defense purchases, and the complex realities of Middle Eastern conflicts. What's interesting is that to mock Turkey's F-35 plans, its ambitions to purchase F-35, Donald Trump wore an F-35 pin. Take a look.
We do a lot of trade with Turkey, and we're going to continue. We're going to do some additional trade. They want to buy F-16s, F-35s, and some other things, and we're going to talk to them about that. And we're just going to have, I think, a very interesting couple of hours. We're going to get a lot done.
Mr. President, when are you planning to lift CAATSA sanctions against Turkey?
Against sanctions against Turkey?
CAATSA.
Could be very soon. If we have a good meeting, almost immediately.
Let's unpack what's going on, because this meeting may signal a new phase in US-Turkey's relationship with ripple effects across the world. Energy was at the very heart of Trump's pressure campaign, and so we will start with energy. Turkey remains deeply reliant on Russian gas and oil, with nearly half of its gas imports in 2024 coming from Russia. Ankara uses those resources to power its manufacturing sector and to ease the pressure of high inflation at home. It's been dealing with very high inflation for years. Much of that gas arrives through the Turk Stream pipeline, which some in Washington view as Russia's backdoor into European energy markets amid Western sanctions. Trump's message to Erdogan was very clear: just cut the ties. Well, Erdogan, of course, is very notorious for leveraging the West versus the East in his foreign policy, so likely this might become a possible bargaining chip moving forward. But Trump would
And there's no bargaining to be made according to biblical prophecy. Turkey is well known for straddling the fence. One day they're with the West, the other day it looks like they're leaning towards the East. But as we just read in Ezekiel 38, Gomer is going to be a company under Gog, and Gog is going to be a guard unto them. And best believe that those Turks see how much those Western European countries are suffering due to those sanctions that the U.S. forced them to push on Russia, and them cutting off receiving their usual rounds of natural gas, oil, and other resources from Russia, even though they've got a lot of backdoor channels. Look up shadow fleets where some of them are still receiving those resources. Europe is suffering of it. Energy prices are going up, and they're facing a energy crisis going into this winter. And they also see that Europe is paying more than double to get U.S. LNG or light natural gas instead of the cheaper alternatives
Very
in Russia.
naive to think that Erdogan would cut Turkey off of Russian energy exports altogether. The United States has already pushed
Straight to
Europe
the
to
point.
impose tariffs and reduce purchases of Russian energy to Europe's detriment, of course, as we know very well. And now Trump wants Turkey to follow suit. But unlike the EU, Turkey is not exactly a vassal state, and Erdogan's foreign policy is very complex.
This is a tough man. This is a guy who's highly opinionated. Usually I don't like opinionated people, but I always like this one. But he's a tough one, and he does an amazing job in this country. And we've had tremendous relationships, both having to do with war and having to do with trade. And I guess today we're talking about both. I'd like to have him stop.
When we say we create personalized hair care products, we mean truly
Damn,
personalized formula.
Buying any oil from Russia.
But for Turkey, this is an economic gamble too. And cutting Russian gas overnight simply isn't realistic. It's not going to happen. Most of these energy deals are long-term pipeline contracts anyway. They're not easy to cancel shipments. However, Turkey did make a concession. Turkey made some moves in recent weeks. It just signed a 20-year supply agreement for U.S. liquefied natural gas. As you know very well, Trump's administration is pushing very hard to get more U.S. LNG into Turkish ports as well as on the international market. And based on Trump's rhetoric, it appears that if Erdogan does want closer ties with Washington, then energy alignment may be non-negotiable. Then there was a discussion over Syria, and I will briefly cover this as I know there are many channels on
jump to
YouTube
about
that
the
go into
5 minute
35's
and 25
sanctions
second
and
mark.
US politics in greater detail. One of Erdogan's key goals in the meeting was getting Turkey back into the F-35 fighter jet program. And I will remind you that Turkey was actually kicked out of this program back in 2019 after purchasing the Russian S-400 missile defense system. And since
And the reason for that is because they didn't want to run the risk of those Turks getting F-35s, and then since they got the S-400, the Russians getting data on how the F-35 reacts to those S-400 anti-missile defense systems. But as we can see, that friction point between the U.S. and Turkey is their relationship
and it has been
with
banned
Russia.
by U.S. Congress from receiving F-35s unless it no longer possesses the S-400. Erdogan arrived in Washington with a deal in hand. He was ready to make a deal. He had a promise to lower tariffs on U.S. goods, and he also had a well-designed plan to buy hundreds of Boeing and Lockheed Martin aircrafts. So in other words, Erdogan is here to spend some cash to please Trump, and Trump recognizes that. But Congress isn't buying it. That's the dilemma here. Even if Trump supports restoring the F-35 deal with Turkey, Congress has the final word. And U.S. lawmakers remain deeply skeptical, and not just because of the S-400 defense system, but also because of Turkey's tensions with Greece. Greece is a close ally of the United States and Israel, and Greece has already ordered 20 F-35s with an option to order 20 more. And that is the exact number of F-35s that Erdogan wants. According to some analysts, Erdogan may see F-35s as a strategic necessity, especially now that Greece is arming up and doing so very quickly. But what's interesting is that Israel is very busy lobbying against Erdogan getting F-35.
Hey, the 1948ers are very busy in lobbying against, Turkey getting those F-35s. Again, using their puppets, their prostitutes in Congress, which best believe Trump is one of Israel's biggest prostitutes, to undermine U.S. Interests for a MAGA make Israel great again.
And I'm
Interest
sure
first.
that it will have a final impact on that decision moving forward, given how things work in Washington. Still, Trump may be motivated by his desire to make a deal. Trump wants to make a deal. He wants to do business. He's very transactional. And reports indicate that Lockheed Martin actually needs large orders of F-35s to sustain production while the United States transitions to the next generation 47 fighter. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE are now seen as the three biggest potential buyers outside.
You know, a couple of weeks ago, you just had Egypt, host a meeting, involving Saudi Arabia and a lot of those other Gulf Arab nations, talking about creating an Arab-style NATO to defend themselves from 1948 attacks.
Erdogan, who is very skilled at sitting on two or even more chairs, depending on how you look at it, appears to be willing to offer just enough cooperation to Trump on things like energy, buying American weapons, of course the ones that he's allowed to purchase anyway, and on Syria. At the same time, Erdogan is set on not pushing Russia away, on not alienating Russia or provoking more backlash at home. Congress remains a major obstacle here, and both Trump and Erdogan are fully aware of it. Reports indicate that Israel and Greece are both pressuring lawmakers to reject Erdogan's ambitions to obtain F-35s, and any real progress from F-35s to Russian energy to Syria requires more than just one visit, of course. Whether this meeting leads to a stronger U.S.-Turkey alliance or just another round of diplomatic meetings, that remains to be seen. I think given the extent of the discussions and given the role of Turkey in the Middle East, Trump is very much ready to continue engaging Turkey and do so more aggressively in order to pursue his own interests in the region. Thanks so much for watching.
Hey, but ultimately, we know what the end-all, be-all is going to be. Gomer is going to link up with Gog, and they're going to come against the West, especially the U.S., and as we continue reading in Ezekiel chapter 38, those 1948ers. I reread verse 7. Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. After many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, or the land of Israel, which have always been waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. Now this jumps to the future real quick, when the true children of Israel are back in the land, which consists of the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, beginning with the elect. But now it's going to jump to, what's about to take place, where, Gog and Gomer and Gog's other allies are going to come against those 1948ers that are dwelling in the land. Verse 9, thou shalt ascend and come like a storm. Thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and all thy bands, Turkey included, and many people with thee. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, it shall also come to pass that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought to go against those 1948ers, which they know is going against the United States of America as well. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. And for the longest time, those 1948ers thought they were untouchable, hence why they kept taking more and more land over there, and we're doing airstrikes and covert operations in the neighboring countries. But as we've seen recently, they're not dwelling so at rest now. Iran showed that they could get past the so-called unstoppable Iron Dome, anti-missile defense system, and show that, hey, we can touch you. And best believe they're going to continue to get touched. And then the big boys are going to come in and handle business as well to take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations. And, this can apply to those 1948ers, because a lot of them came from where? Central and Eastern Europe. And, when we look over at the land of Israel right now, it does look desolate. It's very desert. They got to have a lot of their resources, airlifted in there, especially by the United States of America. And, that's because what? The true children of Israel aren't living there. To take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods that dwell in the midst of the land, which, those Palestinians don't belong in that land either, but, they've taken their land and, their goods, and then what? They get many goods, welfare, U.S. taxpayer dollars, from the U.S., to set them up comfortably over there, with the free health care. Their college education is subsidized. A lot of them are still receiving money from the HOLOCAUST from the 1940s. The list goes on and on. They're the biggest welfare recipients. But, going back to the main point, doesn't matter how many meetings Turkey and the U.S. or whoever has, when everything's said and done, Turkey is going to ally themselves with Russia to come against the West, chiefly the U.S. and, those 1948ers. Which actually, I'll close it out in the book of Obadiah. I'm going to start at verse 1. And this whole book is dedicated to the judgment and the downfall of you Edomites. The vision of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh concerning Edom, you so-called white people. We have heard a rumor from Yahweh, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle, which you're seeing these nations, in the second and the third world, as they're called, rising up economically against these Edomites in the West. Just look at the BRICS, and eventually it's going to be militarily. Behold, I have made thee small amongst the heathen. Thou art greatly despised. The reputation of these Edomites, especially in the West, the U.S. and Israel heavily, is despised. Everybody's looking at those two countries as the root cause of all the problems we see going on right now. But now I'm going to jump down to verse 7. All the men of thy confederacy, or your allies, speaking of the United States of America, have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. We just saw Turkey have a meeting with the U.S. where, they were looking to get the F-35 and make concessions, by buying, equipment from Boeing, making it seem like they were at peace with them, are ultimately going to deceive them and prevail against them. And, a lot of those Turks are Edomites themselves. Just look up the Ottoman Empire and look up a term called Mameluke. They that eat thy bread, receiving money and goods and other things, have laid a wound under thee, turning those very same things against them, or making it seem like they're at peace with you just to eventually betray you. There is none understanding in him. But that's it with this video. With this video, I hope you sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong, so we can clearly see we are almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharella,